a massive head dropped against the rusted bars of a stall. Hooves cracked once on concrete and went still. Ribs pushed against hide, so tight you could count every one. Her belly hung swollen and low, almost dragging on the floor of the stall. A vet shook his head and stepped back. An auctioneer shouted a price and got no answer. $5. Nobody moved. $5 for a giant draft mare nobody wanted to bury. Then a man in a faded jacket lifted one finger from the back of the crowd. Sold. His name was Walter Briggs, and he had $37 left to his name. Every expert there told him she was already dead. They told him the foal inside her was already dead. What that mare delivered 3 weeks later left a barn full of grown men with nothing to say. Stay with me on this one. The trailer ride home was 40 minutes and felt like 4 hours. Walter drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the rear view. Every time the trailer rocked, he flinched. 2,000 pounds of dying horse. He could feel her shifting back there, scraping the wall, then going still for so long he thought she was gone. She wasn't gone. Not yet. Walter was 68 years old. He had a bad knee from a fall off a tank in 1969, and a worse one from 40 years of working other people's farms. His wife Marlene had passed in the spring of last year, and he had not slept right since. He lived alone now on 40 acres of red Georgia clay, in a house his father had built and his grandfather had paid for. The barn out back leaned a little. The fence needed mending. The whole place needed a younger man, and Walter was the only one it had. He pulled in past the mailbox and backed the trailer up to the barn. Slow. Real slow. He unlatched the gate and waited. The mare didn't move. Walter stepped inside the trailer. Up close, she was even bigger than he'd thought. A Belgian draft, the kind they used to plow with before the tractors came. Her shoulders were as tall as his head. Her hooves were the size of dinner plates, and every bone in her body was showing through the hide. "Come on, Mama," he said. Quiet. The way he used to talk to spooked dogs. "Come on. Just a few steps. Just give me that." She didn't look at him. But after a long minute, she lifted one foot. Then the other. She came down the trailer ramp 1 inch at a time, and when her hooves hit the dirt of his yard, she stopped and stood there shaking like a man with a fever. Walter led her into the cleanest stall he had. He'd put fresh hay down that morning before the auction. He'd put a bucket of clean water in the corner. He'd done these things the way another man might have set the table for a guest. He knew what people would have called that. He didn't care. He filled a second bucket with warm water and oats and stood next to her while she ate. She ate slow. She was so weak she had to rest her head on the rim of the bucket between mouthfuls. But she ate. The next morning the vet came out. His name was Dr. Caldwell, and he had known Walter for 30 years. He looked at the mare. He listened to her chest. He pressed his hand against her swollen belly. He stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and didn't say anything for a long time. "Walter, tell me. This horse should be dead." "She's not. Walter, listen to me. She's malnourished, she's dehydrated, her hooves are rotting from the inside, and she's got a foal in her that I can't even hear a heartbeat on. You spent $5 on a funeral." Walter nodded slowly. "What would you do?" "I'd put her down today. Before she suffers any more." "What would it cost to try?" The vet looked at him. He knew Walter's bank account better than Walter did. He knew the wife was gone. He knew the farm was barely holding on. "More than you've got." "That's not what I asked." Caldwell sighed. He named a number. It was a number Walter didn't have. Walter nodded again and asked him what supplies he'd need to start, and what he could do himself, and what could wait. The vet wrote it down on the back of an envelope. Then he packed up his bag and stood in the doorway of the barn and said the last thing he was going to say about it. "Walter, you put her down by the end of the week if she doesn't turn. Don't let her suffer because you're stubborn." "I won't. You're a good man. But you're a fool right now. I've been called worse." The vet drove off. Walter stood in the yard a long time. Then he went into the house, into the bedroom, and opened the top drawer of his dresser. Inside was a small velvet box. Inside that box was his wife's wedding ring. He closed his hand around it. The next morning he drove into town and pawned it for $412. He bought feed and antibiotics and a heating lamp on the way home. The next 10 days were the hardest he'd worked since the Mekong Delta. He set his alarm for every 2 hours. Day and night. 2 hours up. Check water. Check temperature. Hold a syringe of electrolytes against her cheek until she swallowed. 2 hours sleep. 2 hours up again. By day 3, she could lift her head without help. By day 5, she could stand for a full minute on her own. By day 7, she walked 10 steps to the stall door, looked at Walter and walked 10 steps back. He sat down on a hay bale and laughed out loud, and the sound surprised him. He hadn't laughed since Marlene. He named her Maggie. He didn't know why. The name just came. But there was still the foal. "Doctor." Caldwell came back on day 8. He brought a portable ultrasound. He set it up in the stall and pressed it to Maggie's belly and watched the screen for a long time. His face didn't change. Walter stood there with his arms crossed and waited. "Walter." "What?" "There's a heartbeat." Walter let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Walter, hold on. There's a heartbeat. But it's faint. And the foal is small. Way too small for how far along she is. I'd guess she's 8, maybe 9 months pregnant. That foal looks like it's at 5. What does that mean?" "It means the mare's been starving for so long the foal stopped growing. It's surviving but barely. It's not getting enough out of her. And if she goes into labor early, and she might because of the stress, that foal will not survive the birth. What can we do? You feed her. You keep her calm. You pray she carries to term. And even if she does, no guarantees." Walter looked at the screen. He couldn't make out anything. "Just shapes." "Show me where it is." The vet pointed. There was a curved shape, and inside it a smaller curved shape. And in that smaller shape, a tiny flicker, regular as a clock. Walter put his hand against Maggie's flank. She turned her head and looked at him. He had been around horses his entire life, and he had never seen a look like the one she gave him. He couldn't put it into words. He didn't try. "Doc." "Yeah. What's the chance?" Caldwell packed up the ultrasound. He took his time. He was choosing his answer. "I've been doing this 38 years. I've seen mares come back from worse. I've never seen a foal come back from this. I'd say 1 in 100. 1 in 100. At best." Walter nodded. He walked the vet out to his truck. They stood in the driveway. Caldwell put a hand on his shoulder. "Walter, whatever happens, you did right by her." "Not yet, I haven't." The vet drove off. Walter went back to the barn, sat down in the corner of the stall with his back against the wall, and watched Maggie eat. She ate steadily now. Slow but steady. Her ribs were still showing, but not as sharp. The hide on her hindquarters had started to fill in. He fell asleep there, right against the wall. He woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of her breathing, deep and even, and for the first time in 2 years he didn't feel alone in the dark. The days kept going. He sold his old tractor to a man 2 counties over for $800. He sold the rifle his father had given him for $200. He sold a watch Marlene had bought him for their 30th anniversary, and he didn't tell anyone he had sold it, and he tried not to think about it. Word got around. A man at the feed store asked him about the $5 horse. Walter said she was doing fine. The man laughed. "You know what they're calling you in town?" "No, old fool." Walter paid for his feed and walked out. The next week, a woman from the next farm over showed up with a casserole and a bag of carrots. She said she'd heard about the Mare. She said she'd lost her own husband 3 years back, and she knew what it was to fix something just to have something to fix. Walter took the casserole. He thanked her. He gave the carrots to Maggie, and the casserole sat in his fridge for 4 days before he remembered to eat it. Day 21. Maggie walked the full length of the pasture and back without stopping. She lifted her tail. She tossed her head. She looked for the first time like a horse and not like a corpse. Walter leaned on the fence and watched her, and he thought maybe, they were going to make it. That afternoon Caldwell came back for another ultrasound. The heartbeat was stronger. The foal had grown. Caldwell stood up from the screen and stared at it for a long time. "I'll be damned, Walter." "What?" "I'll be damned. She might pull this off." Walter didn't say anything. He just nodded. That night he sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and looked out the window at the barn light. The mare was in there eating. The foal inside her was alive. He had $37 left in the bank, no truck transmission left to speak of, and a kitchen table he'd been eating at alone for 2 years. But the barn light was on, and something inside that barn was alive that wasn't supposed to be. He went to bed. He slept all the way through the night for the first time since Marlene. He woke up to screaming. It was not human. It was the sound a horse makes when something is going terribly wrong, and Walter had heard it once before, on a farm in 1972, and he had never wanted to hear it again. He was out of the bed and into his boots and across the yard before he was even fully awake. He threw open the barn door. Maggie was down. On her side. Sweat dark, breathing in ragged heaves. Her belly was rippling. Her tail was lifted. And there was blood. Too much blood. Already too much blood on the floor of the stall, and she was not even close to delivering yet. 3 weeks early. Maybe 4. Walter dropped to his knees beside her. He pressed his hand against her neck. Her pulse was hammering. "Hold on, Mama. Hold on. I'm here." He ran for the phone in the barn office. He dialed Caldwell. The line rang 4 times and went to recording. Storm warning. The vet was 2 counties over on another emergency. Roads were flooded. Power was out in 3 towns. He'd come as soon as he could. It would not be soon enough. Walter set the phone down. He stood there 1 second. 2. 3. Then he moved. He pulled an old metal box down off the top shelf of the barn office. Inside it was a green book with cracked corners. Field Manual 8285. Veterinary Medicine, U.S. Army, 1968. He had carried it in his footlocker for 2 years in Vietnam, when he was a 19-year-old kid running mules through bad country. He had used it to save 4 animals he could remember, and a dozen he couldn't. He hadn't opened it in 40 years. He opened it now. He flipped to the section on equine birth complications. He read with the book held against his knee, while his other hand stroked Maggie's neck. He read fast. He had been a fast reader once in another life, and the words came back. He read about reposition. He read about presentation. He read about what to do when a foal is breached, and what to do when the cervix won't dilate, and what to do when a mare won't push. Then he set the book down and put his hands on Maggie's belly. He felt. He had delivered calves before. Lambs, foals, once a stuck colt for a neighbor in a thunderstorm. He knew what he was feeling for. He knew what shape a foal was supposed to be in there. And what he felt was wrong. Wrong shape. Wrong angle. 2 heartbeats where there should be one. No, that wasn't right. That was Maggie's heart in the foal's. He kept his hand still. He counted. There was Maggie's pulse, fast and high. There was the foal's heartbeat, faint. And then there was something else. He moved his hand. He felt again. 3 heartbeats. Walter Briggs sat back on his heels in the bloody hay and stared at the wall of the barn for a full 10 seconds without breathing. Twins. Twin foals. In a draft mare. After 8 months of starvation. With a complicated early labor in a thunderstorm, with no vet coming. Twin foals in a horse where twins almost always killed the mother, and almost always killed both babies, and almost always meant somebody was burying 3 bodies before sunrise. He picked the book up again. He flipped to the chapter on twins. The first sentence said the survival rate was less than 10%. He read the second sentence. Then the third. Then he closed the book and set it down beside him and went to work with his bare hands. He worked. He repositioned. He pulled. He waited. He talked to her the whole time, low and steady, the way he used to talk to wounded men on a hilltop in 1969. He told her she was a good girl. He told her she'd come too far for this. He told her about Marlene. He told her about the war. He told her every secret he had, because he believed somehow that if he kept talking she would keep fighting. The first foal came at 4:17 in the morning. It came head first, the right way, slick and steaming. It hit the hay and didn't move. Walter wiped its mouth and its nose with a clean rag. He cleared its airway. He pressed his ear against its tiny chest. He heard nothing. He pressed both hands against its ribcage and pushed. He pushed. He pushed. The foal coughed. It drew a single, shaking breath, and then another, and then it lifted its head off the hay and looked at him with eyes that hadn't been alive 10 seconds before. I'm going to stop you right here for 1 second. If you're with me on this story, if you want to know what Walter Briggs did next in that barn with no vet and no light but a heat lamp, hit that subscribe button. Then come right back. Because what happens next is the part nobody who was there ever forgot. Because Maggie was still pushing. The second foal would not come. Walter had the first one wrapped in a towel by the wall, breathing, alive, and Maggie was pushing again, harder, and nothing was happening. He felt for it. He could feel the head. He could feel the legs. But the angle was wrong. One foreleg was bent back, locked under the body. The foal was stuck. He had read about this 30 pages back. He took a breath. He reached his arm in up to the shoulder. He worked by feel, not sight. He could not see anything. He could only feel the warmth, the curve of a small skull against his palm, the bent leg pinned the wrong way. He found the leg. He cupped the tiny hoof in his hand to keep it from tearing anything as he moved it. He pulled it forward. Slow, steady, the way you ease a rifle bolt that's stuck. Force was the wrong answer. Patience was the only answer. He felt it shift. He felt it lock into place. Then he pulled his arm out and got behind Maggie and put his weight against her flank and said, "Now, Mama. Now. Push." She pushed. The second foal came in a single long motion. It hit the hay beside the first one. It did not move. This one was bigger. bigger than the first by a full handspan. Walter's eyes adjusted in the dim heat lamp light, and he stopped on his knees with both his hands red to the elbows, and he stared. Because the second foal was white, not gray. Gray foals are born dark and light over the years. Gray was common. Gray he had seen. Gray was nothing remarkable. This foal was white. Pure white. Bone white. White as a sheet of new paper, with 4 black hooves and 1 perfect black star on its forehead. A draft foal that size, that color and that breed, was something Walter had only read about in the back pages of an old book. A true white. The kind that doesn't darken. The kind that some bloodlines try for 50 years and don't get. But it was not breathing. Walter dropped down beside it. Same as before, wipe the mouth, clear the nose, press the chest. He pushed. Nothing. He pushed again. Nothing. Behind him, Maggie made a low sound. Almost a moan. He pushed a third time, harder, and put his mouth against the foal's nostrils and breathed. He breathed for it. Twice. 3 times. The foal kicked. Once. Then again. Then it drew a shuddering breath, and another, and Walter sat back on his heels and watched the white sides rise and fall, in the orange light of the heat lamp. 2 foals. Both alive. He moved on instinct now. He pulled both of them around to where Maggie could see them. He laid them at her head. She turned, slow, exhausted, and she looked at them for a long moment, and then her big head dropped down and her nose touched the white one and then the brown one, and she made a soft whickering sound from somewhere deep in her chest. Both foals lifted their heads. Both foals tried to stand. Outside, the storm was breaking. Pale gray light was starting to come through the cracks in the barn wall. Walter could hear birds. He could hear water dripping off the eaves. He could hear his own heart hammering against his ribs. Headlights swung into the yard. He heard a truck door slam. Caldwell came running into the barn at a full sprint, soaked to the skin, his medical bag in one hand. He pulled up short 3 feet inside the doorway. He looked at Maggie. He looked at the 2 foals at her head. He looked at the white one. He looked at Walter, kneeling in the bloody hay with both arms red and his shirt soaked through. He didn't say anything for a long time. Walter. Yeah. Are those twins? Yeah. Are they both alive? Yeah. Is the mare alive? Yeah. Caldwell set his bag down on the floor of the barn and sat down on the hay bale next to it. I don't know what I'm looking at. You're looking at twins, Doc. Walter, twins don't survive. The mare doesn't survive twins. I've been doing this for 38 years, and I have delivered exactly 2 sets of equine twins, and in both cases I delivered 3 corpses. Well, and that white one. What about it? That is not gray. That is white. That is a true white draft foal. Walter, I have seen one in my entire life. One. In a magazine. Walter. Yeah. You did this. Walter looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He hadn't noticed. I just read the book, Doc. Caldwell laughed. It was a short, broken laugh, and there was something wet in it. He stood up. He walked over to Maggie and knelt down beside her and started to work. He checked her vitals. He checked the foals. He gave her a shot of something. He gave each foal a shot of something else. He worked in silence for 20 minutes while Walter sat on the hay bale where the vet had been and watched. When Caldwell stood up, he said, "All 3 are stable." Walter nodded. "Walter, I have to call somebody about that white foal." Why? Because nobody is going to believe this happened. By the end of the week, 3 different people had driven out to the farm to see the white foal. By the end of the month, it was 30. A man from a breeding operation in Kentucky offered Walter $20,000 for the white foal. Walter said no. The man came back 2 weeks later and offered 50. Walter said no again. The man drove off shaking his head, and a week after that, a woman from a registry in Ohio offered 75. Walter took her out to the pasture. He showed her the white foal. He showed her the brown one. He showed her Maggie. "Ma'am." "Yes. That mare cost me $5. I know. That's part of why I'm offering what I'm offering. You're not understanding me, ma'am. I don't mean she wasn't worth more. I mean she didn't come into this world the way most things come into the world. She came in cheap and broken and dying, and nobody wanted her. And she gave me 2 babies anyway. That's not a thing you put a price on. Mr. Briggs, with all respect, I'm not selling the foals. I'm not selling the mare. I'm not going to sell them next year either. So you save your gas, ma'am. Have a safe drive home." She left. Walter went back to the pasture and stood at the fence. The white foal was running circles around the brown one, kicking up its heels, all gangly legs and tail. The brown one was nipping at its mother's flank. Maggie was grazing. Her ribs were gone. Her hide was filling out slow, day by day. She was still bony in places. But she was a horse again. Caldwell pulled up in his truck a few days later. He had a registry man with him. "Walter, Doc, they want to register the white one. Officially. There's a name they need from you." Walter looked at the white foal. He thought about it for a while. "Marlene." The registry man wrote it down without looking up. "And the colt. What about him? He needs a name too." Walter looked at the brown foal. He looked at the heat lamp scar on its leg, where it had been pulled into the world by a shaking pair of hands at 4 in the morning. "5, sir. His name's 5. The registry man wrote that down too. Then he packed up his clipboard and got back in the truck. Caldwell stayed. They stood at the fence together for a long time. "Walter, yeah, you're not going to be a poor man much longer. I never minded being poor, Doc. That's the problem with you. That's always been the problem with you." Walter smiled. "A small one. The first real one in 2 years. Doc, can I tell you something?" "Always." "I sold Marlene's ring." Caldwell turned and looked at him. "For feed and antibiotics. Day after the auction. Walter, I want you to know I'd do it again. If you put me back on day 1 and you said, 'Walter, that horse is going to die anyway, save the ring,' I'd do it again. Every time. And I want you to know why." "Why?" "Because Marlene would have." Caldwell looked down at his boots. "She would have made me. She'd have grabbed that ring and pawned it herself, and brought home a wagon load of feed before lunch. That's who she was. So when I sold it, I wasn't selling her ring. I was being her. For one afternoon. I was being my wife." The vet didn't say anything. A truck rumbled up the road and went past. "Anyway," Walter said. "That's why." He went back to the barn. A year passed. The white foal, Marlene, grew into a yearling that turned every head on the road when she stood near the fence. People stopped their cars. People took pictures. A magazine wrote a piece on her. A second magazine wrote a longer one. Walter was in both. He didn't read either. The brown foal, 5, grew bigger than his sister and stronger than his mother. He was a working draft, all muscle and patience. Walter trained him to plow. The two of them worked the back 40 together every spring, slow and steady, the old man and the young horse, side by side in the red Georgia clay. Maggie lived another 9 years. She died on a soft afternoon in June, in the pasture, with her head in Walter's lap and her 2 grown children grazing 30 feet away. He stayed with her until the sun went down. Then he got up slow on his bad knees, and he walked into the house and called Dr. Caldwell, and the 2 of them buried her in the corner of the pasture, under the biggest oak on the place. He kept one thing on the wall of his kitchen, in a small frame, until the day he himself died 7 years later. A receipt from an auction barn. $5. Paid in full. 1 Belgian draft mare in foal condition, poor. That was what the receipt said. It was wrong about the foal. It was wrong about the condition. It was wrong about everything that mattered. But it was right about the price. And Walter Briggs, until the end of his life, would tell anybody who asked that it was the best $5 he ever spent.